That's not just because of the crops they pollinate, but because the crops they pollinate also feed our cattle and the other things that we eat. It's interesting too that honey is the only food that includes every substance necessary to sustain life. Bearing in mind there's also a percentage, 16% of water in honey. There's a bee yard. I put it there just because I thought a few pictures in between my words would make this a little more interesting. And there's another one here. Christopher Youngblood took some photographs for me, and I want to say I appreciate it, and I've put his name up wherever I've used his pictures. We'll come on to more detail later. Bees do sting. I don't know how many new folks I'm talking to tonight, but most people that have kept bees have been stung. If you haven't, then you're very good at what you do. Most people, though, that don't keep bees will tell you they've had a bee sting when it's a wasp or a hornet. So don't always believe people when they say they've been stung by a bee. If you can't find the stinger, it probably isn't a bee. The biggest difference, and those are kind of pictures of the various insects, the honeybee is absolutely covered in hair, and the wasp and the hornet have no hair at all. The honeybee is eusocial. Now, eusocial is a fancy word, and it's defined by those three attributes. There has to be a reproductive division of work, and in the bee's case, the queen lays the eggs, and the rest of the hive does not. There have to be overlapping generations, and indeed what you'll find with your bees is that you have several generations of bees in the hive at any one time. And there is cooperative care of the young, and indeed in a beehive that is exceptionally true. So they're defined by that funny word, eusocial. A little bit into the biology, you break a bee down basically into three parts. A bee is very segmented: head, thorax, and abdomen. The abdomen, actually, you can see 6 segments, though I think it's 8 or 10, because some are hidden with the stinger. If we break down those sections, the head contains obviously the compound eye, which is what the bee sees with outside the hive. It does not see an image like you and I see. Its eye is made up of many segments. The bee sees a mosaic. It also doesn't see in the same colour range as we do. It sees really in the yellow to ultraviolet. So later on when we talk about what we wear as we tend to our bees, don't wear red, don't wear black. The bees don't like it. Also in the head, on top of the head, there are 3 very small eyes called ocelli, or I guess the singular is ocellus. The ocelli are what the bee uses inside the hive, because of course it's pitch dark inside the hive, and the ocelli are sensitive to very low levels of light. The bee has 4 wings. A lot of people think it's only 2 because when they're flying, the front wings and the back wings are hooked together, but there is definitely 4 wings on the bee. Also on the thorax are the method or the centre of locomotion. The front leg also has an antenna cleaner on it. The bee's antenna is used to smell, to touch, and to feel. And it has to be able to clean it, because wherever the bee goes, it covers itself with pollen. So there's an antenna cleaner on the front leg. The middle leg is mostly what it uses to get around on. The back leg has 2 different functions. Down here at the bottom of the hind leg, there's a claw, so that the bee can climb rough surfaces like trees, but there's also a soft pad there, so the bee can even walk across glass if necessary. The spiracles, these little dots here on the abdomen, are in fact how the bee breathes, and through those small holes the bee will suck in oxygen and then squeeze them shut and squeeze that oxygen further down the various channels that take it to the rest of its body. Remember, the whole of the bee's skeleton is on the outside of the bee. It's an exoskeleton. I learned a lot of words this last week. Also on the back leg, and you'll love this if you haven't had bees before, when you first see them bringing pollen in, there is a part there that they absolutely stuff full with pollen. And it really is interesting, because I thought pollen was yellow, and you're going to find it's yellow, it's blue, it's green, all colours of the rainbow. Now, if you're going to ask me which plants produce what colour pollen, that's another presentation. They detect motion very well through that compound eye. And in fact, some 10 years ago, researchers who had believed prior to that that bees could not hear sound discovered that at close range a bee can actually hear sound. This is a close-up of the honeybee's head. These are the antennae, very much segmented and sense, touch and feel. This is the bee's tongue. There are 3 parts to a bee's tongue, we'll come to that in a minute. The compound eyes on either side of the head. But I think what I notice most about this slide is you can see a lot of hair. And in fact, if I had a slide of a close-up of the tongue, you'd see even the bee's tongue is hairy, so that when a bee is pollinating flowers, it picks up pollen just about everywhere on it. I put the mouth parts up here with a smile. At the Texas Beekeepers Association meeting the other week, one of the honey queens was asked the question, what are the 3 parts of a bee's tongue? Most of us knew it was the front, middle and back. But if you want to be clever, it's the labellum, the glossa and the labial palpus. And nobody knew, of course. It's interesting, there are the mandibles here. The mandibles act a bit like a crab's claw, and the bee uses the mandible to chew up honey, wax, or even to kill pests if it gets close enough. So, oh, and I also ought to tell you that the tongue is really a tubular thing, so that the bee will suck up either honey from the hive if it's on a feeding mission, or nectar from plants. So bees can chew and suck. They actually chew wood, and they clean other bees with the mandibles. I'm not going to go into a lot more detail, just forgive me for this, but there's the rear leg, where you can see the pollen sac. This is where the bee stores pollen, up in here. There's the little claw, and then there's a soft pad under there as well. I found it fascinating, I have to tell you. There's a host of sources on the web. I encourage you, if you're interested, to go to the web and just Google anything about a honeybee you want to, and there are pages and pages and pages. I came across the whole internal anatomy of the bee. I hope you didn't want me to do that. 3 castes of the honeybee. There's the queen, of course, who rules the roost, the worker who does all the work, and the drone who just hangs around trying to look useful. And we'll go into the details of what each of those 3 do. You need to be able to recognize them though. The drone you can always recognize. It's bigger than the worker bee. It has a rounded abdomen because it doesn't have a sting, and those huge eyes. The worker bee is what you're going to see 30 or 40,000 of in your hive, and the queen, bigger than the worker, with a much elongated abdomen which she's using to lay eggs with. Out of interest, in your colony there's probably no more than 200 or 300 drones, and you may not even the first year see that many. All honeybees come from eggs, and they're all laid by the queen. The eggs develop into larvae. The larva undergoes a process called metamorphism. We'll go into this in more detail in just a second. And the development time varies whether you're the queen, a worker, or a drone. The queen is the heart and soul of the hive. She rules the hive, and I guess that's how it should be. The queen's primary purpose is to lay eggs. She also produces pheromones, chemical scents which tell the bees whether they need to be content, whether they should be on guard because somebody's attacking the hive. In general, she controls the hive by how she smells. And I'm told that under attack pheromones and some of the others, you can actually smell different things like bananas, but I never have done. If somebody has, they might tell me. Queen can lay 2,000 eggs a day at 30-second intervals. Difficult to tell you how many eggs that is in a year, because in the winter she lays very few, if any. She cannot feed or groom herself, so the worker bees have to do that. And I say she never leaves the hive. The only time the queen leaves the hive is a virgin queen who will leave the hive to mate and then come back. After that, she stays in the hive for the rest of her life. You hope, because if she doesn't, then your hive is swarming. And we'll talk about swarming another day. A queen will live from 2 to 5 years. I don't know what the statistics are. I think most beekeepers requeen their hives every couple of years, or else allow their hive to supersede, which means create their own new queen. A marked queen, so that you can see a picture. I told you I'd put some pictures up because I get boring. You always mark the queen on the thorax. There are different colours according to the year that you get the queen bee, but don't trust that because last year I think we had the wrong colours on our queens from somewhere. There's a marked queen with... I shouldn't put this down, should I? There's the queen there with actually a blue mark. And then I'm going to show you why it's so hard to find the queen. When you take a frame out of your hive in the middle of the summer, that's what it's going to look like. And you're looking for the queen. And the queen is there. And I know some of you have enough eyesight, unlike me, to see the red spot there. If your queen is unmarked, I'm going to tell you it is very, very hard sometimes to find her. She is a little bigger than the workers, but she'll often be buried in amongst them, or you'll pick out one frame and she'll jump to another, or she'll go down into the bottom of the hive. One thing I did learn last year, which I didn't know before, is that queens actually do make a sound. And it's a very high-pitched sort of, how do you call it, David? It's a weaning sound? It's a piping sound. And it's fascinating when you hear it, because then you can find the queen a lot easier. But she doesn't always do it to order. The queen lays eggs, and that's what a very big enlargement of an egg looks like on the right-hand side there. What you're looking for when you look for eggs in your hive is comb on the left-hand side with these little tiny white specks in the bottom. We'll come on to spring management of the hive next time, but what you do is stand with the sun behind you, shine it down the comb, and hopefully you find eggs. If you don't find eggs, there's a problem. The eggs turn into larvae, and they look like small white worms curled up in the bottom of the comb. They consist of a head and 13 ring-like segments, and they fill the cell very, very quickly. The first 5 days, the larva grows 6 times its body weight each day. And healthy larvae are white. And interestingly enough, from experience, I broke open some burr comb on my hive, and I had these huge white things that looked like maggots, big ones. And I'm told they were drone comb. And I think drone larvae look bigger than worker larvae to me, so you learn every year. That's what the larvae look like from top on, curled into little balls into the comb. We then go into a process called metamorphism. Once the larvae have grown, the worker bees will cap the larva cells, and this is what we call capped brood. The larva then transforms itself into a pupa. The pupa transforms itself into I've got to get this right, imago, which is nothing more than a fancy word for a fully developed and winged insect. And it then emerges as an adult. I think this shows you some of the various stages of the metamorphism. You can see the beginnings of it in the second cell, and the third and the fourth ones show you the bee actually becoming an adult bee. You actually can't see this unless you break the comb open. All you're going to see at this point is the capping on the brood. Honeybee development time is different depending on which caste you belong to. And I don't need to read these out, you can see it there. What makes the difference is what the worker bees feed the larva. If they feed it something called royal jelly, it turns into a queen. Hopefully the bees only do this when they have a sick and an ailing queen. The worker emerges in 21 days, the drone in 24 days. Mostly you're going to see queen and workers in your hives, unless you particularly want drones. Notice that the eggs stay eggs for the same length of time, and the additional time is the time as a larva or a pupa. I thought you'd like to see the different kinds of cells. These that look like peanuts are queen cells. You'll never mistake them. They're a lot longer than any other cell, and they're usually on the bottom of the frames. The domed brood, these here, is drone brood, and you'll see a significant dome above the comb. And the rest of what you're seeing there in the top right-hand side of that right-hand slide is cap brood. When you look in your hive in your first year, you want to see lots of the cap brood on the right. You don't want to see queen cells. And drone cells, well, they're okay, but they're not much good for you. The worker bees have a lifetime of something like 40 to 42 days. And they do a lot of different tasks during that time, some of which overlap. So you have the first 3 days, the bee does housekeeping. Take out the trash, clean up the comb. After that, it gets into undertaking, take out any dead bees, take out any worse garbage than garbage. They then work in the nursery, and you'll see these functions overlap. Working in the nursery means looking after the larva, feeding the larva, capping the brood, and so on. Attending royalty, we said earlier that the queen does not do anything for herself except lay eggs. So there has to be a number of nursing bees that look after the queen and groom her and feed her and generally tell her where to go. They go to the grocery. They've got to feed the queen, they've got to feed the larva and the honey stocks within the hive, or the pollen stocks are where they go, or if you put patties or sugar on your hives, they're going to go get that. They fan the hive. The actual hive is kept at a temperature of somewhere between 92 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Now in our summer that means they don't have to do a lot except cool it down, and in the winter they have to do a lot of warming up. They're architects and master builders in the middle of their life, which means they're going to build they're going to secrete wax from underneath their abdomens, which they're going to make from honey or from sugar syrup that you feed them, and they're going to make the combs. They will guard the hive, and that means they're looking for the bees that are coming into the hive to smell of the right smell, and if they aren't, they will make sure that alarm is given, and then they forage until they die. And basically that's exactly what they'll do. They'll fill their back legs with pollen, or they'll fill themselves with nectar until eventually they can't fly anymore, and that's the end of their life. I put this up because it's interesting. I hadn't realized, but a 2-mile radius from a hive is something like 8,000 acres. So that's one heck of a foraging area. And you'll know this because sometimes you'll see your bees bringing in pollen, but you won't know where the heck you can find any flowers around you. But they will fly up to 5 miles from the hive if they have to. I love this one. This is what you see coming home to your hive. This is the fun part of beekeeping. The back legs absolutely stocked up here with pollen. Pollen on every hair in the body, which is how, by the way, it pollinates, because it rubs those pieces of pollen against the next flowers that it visits. And you can see that eventually, as the wings start to fail and the energy starts to fail, the weight that they're carrying becomes too much for them, and that's when they reach the end of life. The drone. The drone also comes from an egg, but it's an unfertilized egg. That means the genes are from the queen only and not from any drones that she may have mated with. And the drone has one single purpose, and that's to mate with the queen and die in the process. The other thing about these guys that are hanging around waiting for nothing else than that, at the onset of winter, they're usually driven systematically from the hive, because the women won't feed them when they have no purpose to serve. An adult lifespan for a queen, I think we said earlier, was 2 to 5 years. A worker lives 15 to 38 days in the summer, and I've seen numbers like 40 and 42 days, so let's call it somewhere around 40 days. In the winter, a worker lives much longer, because in the winter, certainly north of here, not so much here, the bees are going to cluster into a ball, with the queen in the middle, and they're going to shiver like crazy for the whole of the winter in order to keep the temperature up to 92 to 95 degrees. They move in from the outside to get warm again, then move back to the outside, and they live a lot longer when they don't have to fly and forage. A drone lives somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks. Temperature, because it'll come, when we talk about management of the hive, you do not want to open the hive in less than a 50-degree temperature, however much you might want to look. You smile at me. I am right, yes?
I don't open up the hive unless the bees are flying.
Fair enough. Mine were flying today, but I still wouldn't have opened the hive. So I guess it's a judgment call. Most people would say wait for 60 or 70 degrees and a calm day and a sunny sky and wait until the bees are flying is certainly true. If you don't see bees in the hive, they're either dead or they're all clustered up trying to keep warm. I think that's a very high temperature. It's interesting. I guess in the summer they don't have a lot to do to keep the hive warm, but then what they're doing then is not only fanning it to keep the temperature down, but they're bringing in water so they can keep the humidity at the level they like it. And you can see at minus 40 you don't have any bees left. I don't think that's a problem here. Hey, we're going to talk about the hive and hive parts in a minute. There is a typical first-year hive, I suppose, at the end of the winter. The entrance reduced, so this piece of wood here, which reduces the entrance for the bees, is in place. And the bees are out there doing their thing. If you look inside the hive, this is from 2 years ago. I think we got some 3-frame nukes that year. And that's my 3-frame nuke. So you can see my brand new frames here. And these are the nukes. People that sell you nukes don't give you great frames, just in case you'd like to know. But that's typical of the inside of a not very busy hive. Typical of a frame from the hive. As you pull out the frames, for me it was fascinating my first year as I got slightly scared of this. But this is capped brood. This is what you want to see. Brood where the larva has gone through the larva stage and the bees have capped it. If you don't see capped brood, there's a problem. I don't think I can show you eggs, but you're looking for eggs as well. Oh, I thought a little bit of humour. You can do other things with bees too. I don't think anyone here has done that. If they have, they're very brave. But apparently it's quite safe to do that.